Welcome back to part 2 of the Dachau Liberation Reprisals. We're going to let Felix Sparks and 2 of the prisoners tell the story as opposed to myself this time. And if you all could leave in the comments what you think of this style of video, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for being here and watching. I appreciate you all more than you know. If you like this style of video, please like, share, and subscribe. Without further ado, here we go with part 2 of the Dachau Liberation Reprisals. I will be making a part 3 that's going to go over the 40 defendants from the Dachau prison camp between the commandant's guards and doctors, and we'll look into more of the medical experimentation as well.
A day or so after the fall of Nuremberg, I was designated as a task force commander with the mission of moving with all possible speed towards Munich, Germany. At that time, I was a lieutenant colonel commanding the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, 7th United States Army. Attached to my battalion for this mission were the entire 191st Tank Battalion, Battery C of the 158th Field Artillery, and supporting engineers from the 120th Engineer Battalion, with the Organic Infantry Battalion weapons. The artillery battery, and the over 50 tanks of the Tank Battalion, we had a formidable array of firepower. We were able to smash through the sporadic German resistance with ease, although the many blown bridges caused us some problems. By the late evening of April 28, 1945, we were less than 30 miles from Munich. Shortly after midnight, I received the regimental attack order for the next day. I was ordered to resume the attack at 7:30 the next morning, with the mission of entering Munich. The order stated that if my task force encountered any delay because of German opposition, the following 1st and 2nd Battalions of our regiment would continue the attack into Munich by bypassing the resistance area. I was also informed that the concentration camp near the city of Dachau would be in my attack area, but my orders did not include the taking of the camp. At that time, I knew virtually nothing about Dachau, except that it was a concentration camp near the city of Dachau. In order to set the scene for the events that followed, a description of what I learned subsequently about that infamous place seems appropriate. From the outside, the camp appeared to be an ordinary military post, surrounded by a high brick wall. It was garrisoned by several hundred SS troops and Gestapo agents who lived in comfortable quarters. On the far side of the camp from the main gate was a large rectangular confinement area, surrounded by a moat, a high barbed wire fence and guard towers. Within the confinement area were 34 wooden barracks, some of which were used for administrative purposes and the remainder to house the prisoners. 2 connected larger buildings just inside the only entrance to the confinement area contained the kitchen, laundry, storage rooms, and the camp prison. In this dual facility, prisoners were tortured, flogged, hung at the stake, and executed. This infamous complex now houses the camp museum established by the present German government. Each of the prison barracks was constructed to house 208 prisoners. At the time we arrived on April 29, 1945, each of the barracks contained the impossible number of about 1,600 inmates, many of whom were dead or dying when we arrived. The several barracks used as infirmaries were also filled with the dead and dying. Also within the camp area was an experimental station operated by a Dr. Rascher. It was in this station that gruesome medical experiments were practiced on hapless prisoners. A Professor Schilling caused prisoners to be infected with various diseases, such as malaria, in order to observe their reactions and resistance. Various biochemical experiments were also carried out. Agonizing deaths were usually the common result. Every morning and evening, the prisoners had to parade on Roll Call Square. At any time that a prisoner succeeded in escaping, all the remaining prisoners were compelled to attend a subsequent punishment roll call, lasting a full night and half a day. Prisoners who managed to escape were usually recaptured. They were then confined to the penal barracks for special treatment by the SS and Gestapo personnel, torture and often death. Outside the confinement area, but within the post area, was a rifle range. It is known that at least 6,000 Russian prisoners of war were executed on this range. Only God knows how many others were executed there in similar fashion, while we were occupying the camp. At 7:30 on the morning of April 29th, the task force had resumed the attack with companies L and K and the Tank Battalion as the assault force. The attack zone assigned to Company L was through the city of Dachau, but did not include the concentration camp. A short distance outside of the city, Company I was designated as the reserve unit, with the mission of mopping up any resistance bypassed by the assault forces. Shortly after the attack began, I received a radio message from the regimental commander ordering me to proceed immediately to take the Dachau concentration camp. The order also stated, upon capture, post an airtight guard and allow no one to enter or leave. As the main gate to the camp was closed and locked, we scaled the brick wall surrounding the camp. As I climbed over the wall following the advancing soldiers, I heard rifle fire to my right front. The lead elements of the company had reached the confinement area and were disposing of the SS troops manning the guard towers, along with a number of vicious guard dogs. By the time I neared the confinement area, the brief battle was almost over. After I entered the camp over the wall, I was not able to see the confinement area, and had no idea where it was. My vision was obscured by the many buildings and barracks which were outside the confinement area. The confinement area itself occupied only a small portion of the total camp area. As I went further into the camp, I saw men from Company I collecting German prisoners. Next to the camp hospital, there was a L-shaped masonry wall, about 8 feet high, which had been used as a coal bin. The ground was covered with coal dust, and a narrow railroad track, laid on top of the ground, led into the area. The prisoners were being collected in the semi-enclosed area. As I watched, about 50 German troops were brought in from various directions. A machine gun squad from Company I was guarding the prisoners. After watching for a few minutes, the scene near the entrance to the confinement area numbed my senses. Dante's Inferno seemed pale compared to the real hell of Dachau. A row of small cement structures near the prison entrance contained a coal-fired crematorium, a gas chamber, and rooms piled high with naked and emaciated human corpses. As I turned to look over the prison yard with unbelieving eyes, I saw a large number of dead inmates lying where they had fallen in the last few hours or days before our arrival. Since all the many bodies were in various stages of decomposition, the stench of death was overpowering. I had walked away for a short distance. I hear the machine gunner guarding the prisoners open fire. I immediately ran back to the gun and kicked the gunner off the gun with my boot. I then grabbed him by the collar and said, "What the hell are you doing?" He was a young Private William C. Curtin and was crying hysterically. His reply to me was, "Colonel, they were trying to get away." I doubt that they were, but in any event he killed about 12 of the prisoners and wounded several more. I placed a non-com on the gun, and headed toward the confinement area. It was the foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. This lie really pissed me off. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of German guards killed by my men at Dachau during the day certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 probably being a more accurate figure.
I'm Walenty Lenarczyk, former inmate at Dachau, from Warsaw, Poland. After the shooting, prisoners swarmed over the wire and grabbed the Americans and lifted them to their shoulders among many cries. He helped to lift the soldiers. And while this was going on, other prisoners caught the SS men. The first SS man elbowed one or two prisoners out of his way, but the carriage of the prisoners mounted. They knocked them down and nobody could see whether they were stamped or what. But they were killed. All they cared about was the Americans. For the past 6 years they had waited for the Americans, and for the moment the SS were nothing. They were, all these years, animals to them, and it was our birthday. It was ordered by Himmler that the SS kill all prisoners before the Americans arrived, and when they came fast it was truly our second birthday.
The regimental records for the date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regimental attack, almost all the prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau. During our entry into the camp, a number of company men, all battle-hardened veterans, became extremely distraught. Some cried, while others raged. Some 30 minutes passed before I could restore order and discipline. During that time, the over 30,000 camp prisoners still alive began to grasp the significance of the events taking place. They streamed from their crowded barracks by the hundreds and were soon pressing at the confining barbed wire fence. They began to shout in unison, which soon became a chilling roar. At the same time, several bodies were being tossed about and torn apart by hundreds of hands. I was told later that those being killed at the time were informers or capos. Within about an hour of our entry, events were under control. Guard posts were set up, and communications were established with the inmates. We informed them that we could not release them immediately, but that food and medical assistance would arrive soon. The dead, numbering about 9,000, were later buried with the forced assistance of the good citizens of the city of Dachau. Fearful that the inmates would tear down the gate to their prison area, I posted a number of soldiers at that point. While I was standing near the gate, 3 jeeps from the 42nd Infantry Division approached the gate area. Apparently someone, without my knowledge, had opened the main gate to the camp area. The first jeep contained Brigadier General Henning Linden and a reporter, by the name of Margaret Higgins. The general informed me that the reporter wished to enter the compound to interview the inmates. At that time, a sea of inmates was pressed against the gate, awaiting an opportunity to get out. I advised the general that my specific orders were to prevent anyone from entering or leaving the compound, until otherwise advised by my regimental commander. While I was explaining this to the general, the woman reporter ran forward to the gate and removed the restraining crossbar. The prisoners immediately surged forward, creating a brief period of pandemonium. I ordered my men to open fire over the heads of the prisoners and rush the gate. After a brief struggle, the men closed and secured the gate. It had already been a most trying day. I therefore requested the general and his party to leave and directed one of my men to escort them from the camp. The good general was a dandy who carried a riding crop as his badge of authority. As my man approached the jeep, the general laid a blow on my man's helmet with his riding crop. I then made some intemperate remarks about the general's ancestry and threatened to remove him and his party from the camp by force. He then said I was relieved of my command and that he was taking charge. I then drew my Colt 45 pistol and repeated my request that he leave. He left, but only after advising me that I would face a general court-martial for my actions. In the meantime, the men of company I had rounded up a number of SS troops who were dispersed throughout the camp area. From these prisoners we learned that most of the Dachau garrison, including almost all of the officers, had fled the scene the day before our arrival. Only about 200 were left to guard the camp. We captured most of those, but some were killed. The regimental history book contains a picture of these captives, accompanied by Lieutenant Walsh, the company I commander, and Chaplain Loy. Fate was much kinder to these captured SS men than they were to the inmates of Dachau. Later that day, Major General Frederick, the 45th Division commander, and Colonel O'Brien, the regimental commander, appeared on the scene, and I took them around the camp. I also told them of the incident with General Linden. General Frederick advised me that he would be able to take care of that matter. In the original order which I received to secure the camp, I was informed that our 1st Battalion would relieve me at the camp in order that my task force could continue the attack into Munich. Late that afternoon, Company C arrived by truck and established various security posts. I then started moving Company I out of the camp in order to resume the attack into Munich with a full task force. Before I could again assemble the task force, I received an order that the Tank Battalion, less 1 company, was to be relieved of attachment to my task force. The 180th Infantry was encountering strong resistance in its sector, and the tanks were needed there. Sometime later, I received another order informing me that our 1st Battalion would lead the attack into Munich the next day and that I was to relieve Company C at the concentration camp. The foregoing narrative includes all of the rifle companies which were in the Dachau concentration camp on the day of liberation, those being Companies C, I and L. With these rifle companies were attachments from Companies D and M, along with forward observer parties from the 158th Field Artillery. Small elements of other units were also there, namely a small patrol from the Regimental IR platoon which was with Company I, and some personnel from the 1st and 3rd Battalion headquarters. There were some troops from the 42nd Infantry Division somewhere in the vicinity. Earlier that morning, Company I had reported that they were being fired upon by troops of the 42nd Division. This information was relayed to regimental headquarters with a request that the 42nd Division be informed that we were both on the same side. On the morning of April 30th, our 1st Battalion resumed the attack towards Munich. I'm Abram Satcher, a prisoner at Dachau until it was liberated. On April 29, 1945, the first Allied soldier, an American scout, came through the gate of the main Dachau camp. The few Nazis in the tower watched apprehensively. They were no longer there as guards, they had been ordered to stay on merely to complete the formalities of surrender. The upper ranks had already fled, to blend in among the German civilian population. The young American's first impression was one of glaring chaos. Thousands of ragged skeletons, in the yard, in the trees, waving little rags, climbing over one another, hysterical, completely out of control. The scout went back for support and returned with a small detachment. The flags of many Allied nations had suddenly appeared. Apparently the prisoners had been secretly piecing them together over the months, from tatters and patches and strips of cloth. One prisoner, a Polish priest, exuberantly kissed an officer, learning later to his glee that she was Marguerite Higgins, of the New York Herald Tribune, the first American war correspondent to report on Dachau. A military chaplain came forward and asked that all who could do so join him in a prayer of thanksgiving. Soon the advance scouts were joined by other Allied soldiers, and one of the German guards came forward to surrender with what he believed would be the usual military protocol. He emerged in full regalia, wearing all his decorations. He had only recently been billeted to Dachau from the Russian front. He saluted and barked, "Heil Hitler!" An American officer looked down and around at mounds of rotting corpses, at thousands of prisoners shrouded in their own filth. He hesitated only a moment, then spat in the Nazi's face, yelling, "Schweinhund," or bastard, before ordering him taken away. Moments later a shot rang out and the American officer was informed that there was no further need for protocol. Some Nazis were rounded up and executed along with their guard dogs. Two of the most notorious prison guards had been stripped naked before the Americans arrived to prevent them from slipping away unnoticed. They, too, were cut down. General Eisenhower sent a laconic communique from headquarters. During the next few days as the burials went forward, the sick and the dying were transferred to hospital facilities, makeshift as they had to be, and food was carefully distributed. Prescribed might be the better word, for the starving had to adjust their food intake with medical discipline. Only then did the American command turn to review the files that the Germans, with characteristic meticulousness, had maintained. The full record of the pseudo-medical experimentations came to light. Prisoners had been used as laboratory animals, without the humane restrictions placed on animal experimentation.
At that point in the war, the troops had seen 511 days of combat. Dachau was different. For a few of them, it was too much. I'll tell you a story that I haven't told, but I can tell it now since the guy's dead, Sparks said. At one point, I came around a corner and saw my company commander running after a German, hitting him in the head with the barrel of his carbine. He kept chasing him and hitting him and saying, "You sons of bitches. You sons of bitches. You sons of bitches." That's all he could say. I ran forward, and he wouldn't stop, so I hit him with the butt of my .45 and knocked him down. He laid down there and started crying. Just crying.